New year, new series and a new time slot as well. Debate night is back tonight. We're in Govan, just a couple of miles from the centre of Glasgow. We're in the old town hall on the banks of the River Clyde in an area once famous for shipbuilding. It's still struggling to recover from economic decline and deprivation. So what matters most to the people living here? Let's find out. Welcome to Debate Night. Debate Night is the only show in Scotland bringing the decision makers to the people. On our panel this evening, from the SNP, Cabinet Secretary for the Constitution, External Affairs and Culture, Angus Robertson MSP. Former SNP leader at Westminster, Angus is chairing the SNP's campaign committee for next year's Scottish Parliament elections. From Scottish Labour, the UK Government Minister for Scotland and MP for Midlothian, Kirsty McNeill. Kirsty was elected last summer. Before that, she was Executive Director of Save the Children and worked in Downing Street as a special advisor to Gordon Brown. Also with us, Karen Dunbar, one of Scotland's leading entertainers. She shot to fame as part of Chewing the Fat, and as well as acting and writing, she's about to travel the country on an 80-date tour. From the Scottish Conservatives, Douglas Lumsden is an MSP for North East Scotland. Former co-leader of Aberdeen City Council, Douglas is also the party spokesperson for Net Zero and Energy. And finally, John McLellan, former editor-in-chief of the Scotsman publications, who just this week joined the Herald as a columnist. John has worked in the media for 40 years and was the Scottish Conservatives' Director of Communications during Ruth Davidson's leadership. Please welcome them all to Debate Night. And welcome to our studio audience. It's great to be back with you in Govan, our second time here. And you can join in the discussion from home, wherever you happen to be in Scotland tonight. BBCDN is the hashtag you need right now to debate along with us on social media. And our podcast of the show will be available for you to download straight after this broadcast is finished. So let's get started. Our first question of the night comes from Fraser Davidson. Fraser, good evening.
Good evening. How do we grow the economy without compromising the environment and sustainability?
Thank you, Fraser. In a wide-ranging speech today, Chancellor Rachel Reeves said she would dismantle barriers to growth in this country, relaxing planning rules and giving the go-ahead for a third runway at Heathrow Airport. Kirsty McNeill, you're a government minister here in Scotland. Barely a mention for Scotland in any of this. What's in it for the people in this room here tonight?
Well, Fraser, it's a great question, and we've already seen in our budget 1.4 billion allocated to local growth here in Scotland. Just on Friday, there was the announcement of a partnership between the National Wealth Fund and a strategic investment zone here in Glasgow. And of course, we've had that record settlement for the Scottish Government from that budget.
What does that actually mean in terms of growth for these people who are in front of you tonight? Kate Forbes said Scotland's an afterthought in all of this.
Well, I don't see how that can possibly be the case when just on Friday there was an announcement of a partnership with the National Wealth Fund. We've already seen some indication from the budget that things are starting to turn around. So the IMF just upgraded the UK's growth forecasts and credited the decisions made in the budget. But there's no doubting it will take a long time to turn things around. If you just cast your mind back to last July, I think one of the reasons people were so desperate to get rid of the Tories was because of the almighty mess that had been left. You'll have to give us a bit of time to clear that up. That's been 14 years in the making.
That's not what you're talking about. I mean, growth, Heathrow Airport, third runway, by the time that's gone through planning, it's going to be decades before any of this happens.
Well, if your direct question is what difference would a third runway at Heathrow make to Scotland, I just say this: the single biggest export that goes through Heathrow is Scottish salmon. So there is a direct line between that decision made today and what happens here. But there's also a direct line between the decisions made at the budget to recreate stability in this economy and, as I say, direct investment being made into Scotland to the tune of 1.4 billion.
OK, let's find out what people think. Man with the glasses, third row. Yeah.
I disagree with what's been said here. The fact is that only last October in the budget, National insurance has gone up. That has made it really hard for anybody to really get a job or keep a job. As myself, I've struggled to get one. And that's down to the fact there's less jobs. And that's down to the budget last year done by Labour.
So this announcement today about growth, do you see anything in it that's relevant for you?
Not really, because what's been said is that, well, in fact, oh, Heathrow, well, that's where the salmon and all that goes through. Why can't it go through a Scottish airport and help Scottish jobs in this country? I appreciate that, well, it's the hub. We have problems. We have having to go down to Heathrow from Scotland. Why can't it just go through Scotland, help the environment, one journey, rather than it just being here to there somewhere to England before it goes to...
Thank you. Lady with the glasses here. Yes.
The questioner mentioned the dissonance between the growth plan and the environmental costs that might have. Labour seem to have kind of gone strangely quiet on their commitment to any environmental planning. Surely something like the Heathrow Airport has binned any thoughts of green energy or environmental cost.
Kirsty, I'll come back to you on that. Angus Robertson, are you in favour of the SNP of a third runway at Heathrow from an environmental point of view, never mind an economic point of view?
Well, the first thing I would say about growth in general is I think everybody wants to see economic success. The problem, though, is you're certainly not going to do that by introducing a tax on jobs, which is what the UK Labour government has done. That is going to be appalling for the private sector. It's going to be appalling for the public sector because it makes everything more expensive and squeezes the budgets. And that's not a good thing. We're also in year 5 of Brexit that has been an absolute unmitigated disaster for Scotland and the rest of the UK.
Just let me push you on Heathrow and that.
I'm coming to that.
You used to be in favour of that. Are you still in favour of it?
Well, I mean, I'll look at the merits of the case of Heathrow, and there's also talk about Luton and other London airports. But the point's been made. Why on earth are we exporting major Scottish products, whether that's salmon or whisky or anything else, via Heathrow? Why is the UK Labour government... Why is the UK Labour government, when talking about growth in national infrastructure, delivering it elsewhere and not here? I could talk about Grangemouth. I could talk about carbon capture that was supposed to happen in the northeast of Scotland. I could talk about a supercomputer, an £800 million project, one of the first things that Labour cancelled when they came into government. None of these things help growth. And I wish success to London, to the southeast of England, to the Oxford-Cambridge corridor. And, you know, if they are economically successful, then no doubt we'll get some trickle-down benefit. But we have to aspire to something better than that, surely. So let's end the self-harm of Brexit. Let's get back in the single market, the customs union. Please, let's rejoin the European Union. Let's stop taxing jobs. And let's actually have the ambition to be successful like every single one of our independent Northern European neighbours, all of which are wealthier than Scotland.
We need better decision-making. Record on growth, Angus?
Well, if you look at Scotland's position relative to the rest of the UK, GDP per head of population has grown more than the rest of the UK. In terms of inward investment, it has been better than everywhere except London and the South East. But I'm not sure that everybody feels that things are as good as they could be. And that's why I just asked the question. Given that we know that every single one of our neighbours has managed to grow their economy more successfully than the UK has, maybe we should follow their lead and make better decisions closer to home rather than letting people make bad decisions on our behalf.
Let me hear from the audience. Lady on the end of the row. Yes, on you go.
Can I just say, firstly, she's supposed to be Chancellor of the UK. Everything I heard today was London, Manchester, Oxford, Cambridge. That sounds like Chancellor of England stuff. And secondly, Labour are more willing to destroy the environment than they are willing to do things like consider this pan-European Mediterranean thing, because they're so afraid of Nigel Farage and Rupert Murdoch and Viscount, whatever his name is. I find it so frustrating the way that they're willing to just prevaricate and obfuscate, and how far they're willing to go to set back on climate goals rather than doing real things.
Kirsty, I will come back to you on this, but Douglas Lumsden, how do we grow the economy without compromising the environment, sustainability?
Well, I want to go back on what somebody mentioned there about the tax on jobs. The national insurance hike that Labour did as soon as they came in was the complete opposite of trying to grow the economy. As we've heard, so many people have, jobs have been lost because of that rise. So that was something that was, completely completely wrong. In terms of Heathrow Airport, I think it will be good for Scotland as long as there's slots made available to Scottish airports to actually have access into Heathrow. So we need to see a bit more clarity around that. And
the environmental impact?
Well, in terms of the environmental impact, I think as long as it can be done to try and mitigate that as much as possible, then it's a good thing. Just as we've seen in north east of Scotland in terms of pylons, working with communities to try and make sure that their voices are heard to try and reduce that impact as much as possible.
Karen Dunbar.
I always like to come for a wee bit of left field here because as much as I enjoyed the question, you know, how do we grow the economy? Sometimes I think, why grow the economy? Do you know, what are we doing? You know, how do we make more money? For what? Is this not the reason that the planet's got into the state that it's in already? Is with the pursuit, and the greed. So I'd be interested more in an examination of that question as well as why grow the economy.
OK, John, your view for Karen, why we need to grow the economy, and does today's announcement do it?
Well, somebody has to pay for schools and hospitals and everybody else who works in public services, and that's the private sector. It generates the tax that government needs to spend. Today, two things struck me. One, it wasn't so much the England-Scotland thing, but this was all big projects. There wasn't an awful lot for SMEs, and they're the real engine of the economy. And SMEs are about to be whacked by higher national insurance contributions, paying a higher minimum wage, and possibly the most difficult of all, the contents of the employment bill, all of which will make operating a business and recruiting people much, much more difficult.
And what about Scotland?
Job generation.
Kate Forbes says Scotland was an afterthought in all of this.
Well, I mean, I was listening to Angus and I was intrigued by that because, you know, Scotland could build this and do that and all the rest of it. Scotland can't build the Sheriff Hall roundabout. We've been waiting for that for over 6 years. The money's there, it's not happened. We haven't jewelled the A9, the A77, the A75. Big infrastructure projects that are in the gift of the Scottish Government are not happening. So God knows what would happen to try to build an airport.
OK, let me hear from the gentleman with the tie in the middle there. Yes, on you go.
The only way you can increase the economy of the country is to lower the energy prices. In 2023, we went into a mini recession, and Rishi Sunak blamed the furlough money that was given out during the COVID. That's what he blamed. He never blamed the oil companies there, especially Sir Jim Ratcliffe, who earned in the year 2022 to 2023 £3.5 million in wages. His bonus was £4.5 million. This was a chart there that says it was a great football supporter. And what did he want? He wanted to buy Manchester United for £600 million. The owners of Manchester United told him, no, we're not selling it, but you can buy a seat on the board for £300 million. So he done it.
Are we getting to a question here?
Yes. This is the guy here that's putting up the energy prices. Yes. He put it up in 2023 by 10%, and 6 months later, in April, he put it up another 5%.
Okay.
How can we, as a population, keep going and increasing the economic of the country if he's pushing the prices up so high that it's costing the manufacturers there over the odds there for their goods?
OK, on that point, Kirsty McNeill, and also on the points that have been made by the audience about, is Labour sacrificing its principles on the environment and sustainability to achieve growth?
So I don't think it's a fair characterisation of our level of ambition to say that we are stepping away from climate and sustainability goals. We still have our clean energy mission, and we've made, bear in mind, some quite controversial choices about the transition from oil and gas and creating GB energy. You know, about half of the energy jobs in this country, in the whole of the UK, are here in Scotland. We're trying to make balanced choices that take those workers and those communities with us while still achieving our high ambitions on climate. And if I may, around the question about employers' national insurance contributions, the hard reality is this, that those employer national insurance contributions that we have levied as a result of the budget are going to raise about £25 billion for investment in public services. If people don't think it should have come from that source, they have to tell us what the alternative is, or they have to say, actually, we don't want investment into an NHS that's on its knees. We're satisfied with a situation where 1 in 6 Scots are on a waiting list. I'm not. So the direct answer to Karen's question of what do we need growth for? We need growth so we can reinvest it in our public services. After 14 years of Tory austerity, we're absolutely on their knees and needed to be saved by a bold budget that did ask business and the wealthiest to pay a bit more.
OK, man in the second row in the sweater. Yes.
What is the point of raising national insurance to get taxes in and then dishing it out to farmers in South America, Africa, etc.? What is the point of doing that? None whatsoever, surely.
So is the nature of your question, why do we give any form of international aid?
No. Why are we dishing out additional aid to people who don't really want it or need it, didn't expect it, and then taxing the living daylights out of the working people in this country and reducing jobs? We're just heading back towards unemployment of the 70s if we carry on in this way.
Well, my understanding is that the unemployment figures in Scotland have actually recently gone down a little. I'm not going to claim that everything has been fixed. As I say, if you took over a company that had been mismanaged for 14 years, it would take more than 6 months to turn it round. But we are trying to stabilise the economy. Okay. The public finances were in a terrible state. The industrial strategy was nowhere to be seen. There's a huge amount of work to be done, but there's also a huge amount of work that has begun, whether it's the creation of GB Energy or the pay rise for 200,000 of the lowest paid Scots. We've started the work, but there's still more to do.
Briefly, Angus?
Well, just responding to the questioner about energy. Energy really matters in a cost of living crisis to every household, and it matters to businesses that depend on competitive energy prices. But it just seems to me very odd that we're in one of the most energy-rich countries in Europe, in the world, yet we have seen our energy bills go up. We saw Labour promise to cut them, but they went up. And then we saw a cut to winter fuel allowance by the UK Labour government. Again, a big impact for people's energy and their energy consumption. There's something really wrong here. I've already mentioned Grangemouth, but, you know, it's a major part of our national infrastructure. We were promised if people voted Labour it would be saved. It's not, it's closing. So the energy really matters, and it matters to us as individuals, it matters to our economy, and it matters to the country at large. And we have to aspire to something better. To just imagine for a second, where are the most expensive transmission charges for energy anywhere in the UK? They're in Scotland, the most energy-rich place. And who's going to be exporting the renewable energy that we produce to be able to support the Oxford-Cambridge data future that's been promised by the Labour government? It seems everything is topsy-turvy when we come to this. I think we should recognise the fact that we're energy-rich. I think to the questioner about the environment, we absolutely need to stay true to our ambitions, and that's why Scotland's renewable future is so important, not just for the economy, but also for the environment. Okay. But we need to take energy much more seriously, and we shouldn't make promises that are then not kept. Okay. But we should do a lot better with the energy that we are so fortunate to have in this country.
All right, thank you. Tonight we're in Govan in Glasgow. Next week we're going to be in Stirling, and the week after that we're going to be in Aberdeen. If you want to come along and join us, just go to the website, details on your screen there, and our new QR code as well, which you can scan, which will take you directly to the website. So do that if you get a chance. Let's go to our second question of the night, which comes from Mark. Mark Merley. Evening, Mark.
Hi, good evening. Do we need a version of Donald Trump?
Right. 9 days in, President Trump has already signed hundreds of executive orders, pulling out the Paris Climate Agreement, cracking down on immigration, ending diversity and inclusion in the government workplace, promising a golden age for America. What do you think, Mark? Do we need a version of Trump?
I think what we do need in Britain is perhaps to have politicians who have some real-world, real-work experience, rather than people who've come up through the politics degrees, never had worked in the real world. Listening to the debate earlier on about the working from home. Great if you're a civil servant, great if you're in the public sector. If you're in industry where it's competitive, not a hope in hell. And if you want to work in a factory, in a shop, drive a lorry, deliver goods, I'm sorry guys, what fantasy land are you living in that everyone's going to have to do this? EDI has become almost a cancer in terms of what's happening to our workplaces and the way we behave. We need to get back to reality.
Okay. John McLellan, do we need a version of Trump here?
Well, we need something that cuts through the restrictive Gordian knot of the way that government operates to be able to get things done. We are not going to have a Donald Trump because we don't have a presidential system. The king doesn't rule by decree. We have a parliamentary system, and so there are checks and balances that are not going to be there. But I do think there's a lot to be said for that kind of can-do attitude. Whether or not you agree with what he's actually done, that's not the point. The point is he said he was going to do things, and he's gone and done them. And I think that's why so many people have been impressed by that kind of delivery on action.
Let's hear from that lady on the end, down there. Hello, good evening.
Hello, good evening. In answer to the gentleman's question about Trump, I'm not going to say it, but I'm going to kind of revert to my friend Janie Godley's comment about Trump, and I don't think we need Trump. I think we need... If Trump was going to come and say he was going to pay the WASPI women their compensation, as the Labour government did say they were doing, yes, I'll bring Trump in then. But I don't think we need a Trump in the UK, or definitely not in Scotland.
Let me go over here. Person over here. Yes, on you go.
I just want to say it's ridiculous to say Trump came up from the ground. He's got generational wealth. He's a millionaire. He is not one of the people. We do need much more people in politics, yes, that do not come from SPADs, that do come from, charities and even just the union movement. And yes, but also we need education in our schools, we need politics in our schools, we need to get the kids excited about politics again so they will grow up and want to be politicians, because yes, we do need a wider group of people, not just, pale, male, steel, white, but we really need to open up the system so that can happen.
OK, thank you. And man on the back row with the beard.
No, it was just quickly to say that I think with the litany of failed businesses and empires that Donald Trump has built and presided over the falling of, probably not the best role model. In addition to that, I would also like to maybe perhaps pick up on the gentleman's comment about EDI being a cancer, and does he belong to any of the groups that are protected under EDI law?
Well, we've got 77 million people in America voted for Donald Trump. He won the popular vote, so he's saying something that people there seem to like. Can Dunbar, do you see anything that could be applied here? Do we need a Trump here?
I'm just enjoying the fact that we think we don't have a Trump here already. The idea that Trumpishness doesn't exist in Britain. I don't know where we're getting that from, because it might be different methods, but it all boils down to the same thing. It's a system where the rich will get richer and the poor will get poorer, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if we've got somebody waving their pen, taking people's lives away by the wave of a pen or doing it under the table. It all boils down to the same thing. Same shit, different tie.
And yet 77 million people voted for him.
Did they, though?
I think we know they did. Why do you think it happened? Why do you think it happened?
Why do you think Trump got in? Because it's the pendulamic, which is a word I made up. Let's enjoy that. It's just the pendulamic swings of the world that we're in. And we'll just watch it. We'll watch it. Maybe we'll not be here for it, but that will happen again, and we'll watch it happening here.
Douglas Lumsden?
Yeah, I think maybe we need a Trump light, because I do think some of the ideas he's got in terms of cutting out some of the bureaucracies, cutting out some of the waste, I think that sort of does, a lot of people agree with that when they see some of the stuff that's going on. In terms of the Scottish Government, we've seen so much waste. 2 ferries that are costing 400 million. We're seeing the deposit return scheme that's scrapped, it's costing taxpayers another couple of $100 million. So, when you look at that, there is a need for cutting out waste.
But you need to be saying that, don't you? Because this is the reform agenda, and they are snapping at your heels in Scotland now.
No, not at all. It's
well, they are.
I think a lot of people will be looking at reform and sort of making sure what they do. But in terms of reform, they have no leader in Scotland. They have no policies. They have no principles, really. So, I think in terms of what we're doing in terms of Scottish Conservatives, we're putting our manifesto together for next year, and we'll be putting that to the people.
Thank you. Man in the back row with the beard and the glasses. Yeah.
A think we've already had our version of Trump several Tory governments ago, and he's now away. But it's very easy to win a popularity contest saying you're going to fix all the problems and everything's terrible. Doing it's another thing.
Angus Robertson.
So I agree with Karen. We have populism here. We have Nigel Farage here, now in opinion polls overtaking the Conservative Party, snapping in the heels on the Labour Party in England. By-election Bannockburn last week that the SNP won. The Labour Party was only 100 votes ahead of Farage's party. Now this should worry all of us who care about mainstream politics, because I don't think there is any place for that kind of populist extremism in our country. We could talk about being anti-European, we could talk about the demonisation of people who have come from other countries, we can talk about being in favour of the privatisation of the National Health Service. I do not support that, I do not want that here, and I think the majority of people in Scotland don't want that. But we are going to have to vote for mainstream parties that reject that kind of politics. In terms of, do we have to take the United States seriously with President Trump as their head of state? Of course we do.
You'll be off to Tartan Week in April in New York. You might well have to deal with him.
As it happens, I'm not going this year, but I'm about to. But I am going to make the
because
point.
Of him?
But no, not at all. But I am making the point that it does matter that we have as good relations as we can with the United States as possible. That's not the same thing as you agree with Donald Trump, his politics and how he does it. We face the prospect. The gentleman asked the question about we should have people with a business background in politics. I totally agree. But we shouldn't be getting into trade wars, and we shouldn't be facing the prospect of massive tariffs against whiskey, against salmon exports, against cashmere, etc., etc., etc. And we fear that we may face that from the United States. So we have to persuade everybody, even those we may not agree with in the US, that tariffs are not the way to sort out our relations. We shouldn't have Pied Pipers in Scottish or British politics, but when it comes to Donald Trump as the President of the United States, we are going to have to work as well as we can with an administration that has been elected by voters in that country.
OK, thank you. Lady in the front row.
I feel the day that we need a Donald Trump is a really, really bad day, and it actually terrifies me, the thought of it. I'm on TikTok a lot, and TikTok thinks I'm American because of the many videos I'm watching about it. Like, it absolutely terrifies me. If that's what we need, then, you know, and if, you know, the antics that happened last week with Elon Musk is anything to go with, if that's how he's going to give me his heart, he can keep it.
Lady with the glasses, the third row back, yeah.
Hi, it's all right you saying that 77 million people voted for Trump. How many didn't vote for him?
Well, he won the popular vote in America.
I know he did, but there was a lot more didn't vote for him. And I think that's actually quite important. It's all right saying vote for A or vote for B, right? But if you do not engage with people, the general public, they won't go out and vote for you. They won't vote for your policies at all, regardless of who you are. And I certainly don't think Scotland or the UK in any way needs a Trump. I think we've got enough idiots.
Man in the front row.
Is the fear of tariffs enough for you to sit by Trump's heel?
I'm not in favour of sitting at anybody's heel. I've made my point clearly that I'm not in favour of populist politics. But I do think that whilst we should do everything to resist any of that in this country, having a relationship with the United States, with the people of the United States, does matter. Do I hold out hope that there will be an avoidance of tariffs? I'm not so sure. I've watched the last week like everybody else, and there seems to be one announcement after another, and I'm not sure how many of those I might agree with. But I'm just making a point that whilst I reject the politics of populism, and we're seeing it right across Europe, unfortunately, not just in the United States, at the same time we need to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to protect and support important industries. That's not the same thing as sitting at anybody's heel.
So over 100 executive orders so far. Does anyone see anything at all happening under Donald Trump that they would like to see happening over here? Man in the back row, hand straight up. Yeah, on you go.
So, thinking about the principle of it all, of what he's done, is addressing what people see as a perceived waste of tax money. Yet in the UK, we're actually struggling under the highest tax burden since the Second World War. Yet our public services everywhere seem to be struggling. So the question has to be asked, what has gone wrong and how can we fix it? Because there's a massive tax burden, but no delivery.
Kirsty McNeill.
No, I agree with the gentleman that there is a problem and a crisis in our public services. I also agree that there are already populist strains in UK politics, unfortunately. And until last July, Scotland was, I'm afraid to say, burdened by two governments in a symbiotic relationship, criticising each other all the time, who thrived on their division and anger from one another. Since we came into office, we tried to reset the relationship with the Scottish Government.
Is that working?
I believe that every conversation I have with a Scottish stakeholder, whether it's a Scottish business or organisation, says they've noticed a difference, because they finally have in the UK a government that is less interested in admiring problems and apportioning blame, and more interested in fixing problems and taking responsibility. And I'm sorry to say that that taking responsibility does not lend itself to easy slogans, because it's about the hard yards of actually delivering things, and that will take time and it will be difficult. And it would be much easier for me as a politician to live in a world where everything that we were doing would fit on a placard or into a post on X. We don't live in that world. We live in an incredibly complicated world where we're trying to balance all sorts of considerations all the time. But it's only if we are able to balance them, raising the taxes, raising the resources that can actually pay for the investment in public services, the lifting of the minimum wage and the living wage that people want to see. It's only if we actually are responsible about keeping things in balance that we'll deliver the things that will help refire people's faith in democracy. I'm afraid easy answers have done Scotland no service at all.
Has the relationship with the UK government been reset? Angus Robertson.
I think the tone has definitely been better. There have been conversations about ways in which we can work together. So I can take an example, because I mentioned Brexit before. One of the areas where there is a potential of seeing improvements, it's not the ultimate solution, but it requires both governments to work together, is in terms of what can we do better with our European neighbours. That might involve a deal that would be very good for our agriculture, our food and drink sector, an SPS agreement. It could mean Erasmus Plus, a great thing for our students at university, rejoining Creative Europe, something that would really matter to our cultural sector, and free movement for younger people. All of these are things on offer from the European Union. All of these are things that the Scottish Government agrees we would like to see happen. So we're talking with the UK Government to persuade them to do just that, and we will see. We've heard there's a reset. We have yet to see any delivery on them with a new tone, which I welcome, but we're getting to a point where we're going to have to see delivery on these kind of things.
OK, all right. There's lots more to discuss this evening. Your views on all of this, the hashtag is BBCDN on social media. Let's go to our third question of the night, which comes from Elaine Jones. Evening, Elaine.
Good evening. Thank you. The NHS was designed in 1948 for a social and medical culture that no longer exists. Almost no one is driving a car designed in 1948. Isn't it time that we are honest and admitted that it's not just about the money, that the principles are good, but the current model is not fit for purpose?
Thank you, Elaine. On Monday, John Swinney unveiled a new plan for the NHS promising better access to treatment. Angus Robertson, is the current NHS fit for purpose?
I think it's under unparalleled strain, and that is a challenge. It's a challenge to the Scottish NHS. It's a challenge to the NHS in England or the NHS in Wales. These are universal.
Says the NHS is broken. Why won't you say that here in Scotland?
I think you can point to different aspects of how the NHS is trying to cope with the demand that it's got, and acknowledge that there are crises in different parts of the NHS.
Parts about broken.
Well, I think all of our experiences will show that we will go to A&E and there's a long wait, or we might go to our GPs and sometimes there is a wait and sometimes there isn't. I don't think it's as simple as saying everything doesn't work, we need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I believe in the public provision of health. That's not the case in the United States. That's not the case advocated by some other political parties. So I think we should stand by the principles of the establishment of the National Health Service, that we should have healthcare for all, regardless of income. Having said that...
It doesn't have to be the American model. There are many different ways of doing healthcare around the world.
Yeah,
work better than we have here in Scotland.
Of course we have to be open to reform. We have to be open to different ways of doing things. The point I'm trying to make, though, is I think it's an important principle that we want to make sure that our health service is publicly accessible to all. How we deal with the stresses and strains, and yes, things that come along like COVID, yes, things that come along like the flu experience we've had in recent weeks, these are huge challenges to our National Health Service, but the lady's absolutely right. This is not just a question about money. And so I think we need to be open, I certainly am, I know my colleagues are, because we care about the National Health Service, to make sure it is everything that it possibly can be. But we're living longer, our care does cost more because of the complicated nature of health interventions that we can now make. We've got added challenges of how do we deal with the social care sector. We created a National Health Service. Why is there not a national care service?
Well, you had the opportunity to do something on that last week and you decided not to.
That's because the other parties blocked it. I think we do need to have a care service that is open to all regardless of care, not just a National Health Service. Okay. But it is not, it comes with a price tag, it doesn't solve every problem, and we are living with unprecedented demand. So there are knots that we were hearing a moment ago, people saying, be careful of people with easy solutions to very challenging circumstances, and this is one of them.
Okay, lady on the end here.
Yeah, I just wonder what role you think prevention has in terms of the NHS and making it accessible for people. And you mentioned there the National Care Service and it was blocked by other parties, but I think it's important that the SNP take some responsibility. If it wasn't liked and wasn't able to be passed, then ultimately that relies on the group. So what is the answer and how do you make social care part of the puzzle alongside health?
Okay, Angus, I'll come back to you on that thought, and whether it was maybe too ambitious in the first place. Lady in the same row had her hand up as well. Yes, on you go.
Again, I was just going to say something quite similar to that. Is how it's not just a case of the NHS is failing or not failing. We've got other social services, we've got education, we've got the social care services. When people can't get discharged from a hospital into a care home, is it the NHS that's at fault or is it the care sector that's at fault? Right. So I think that we just need to be careful not to just, like you say, throw the baby out with the bathwater when the problems are much wider, not just the NHS.
Thank you. And man, the second row here. Thank you.
I think we should be wary of dismissing the NHS. My experience, I have cancer and the Beatson in Glasgow, and I know a lot of people who've had similar experiences have been absolutely fantastic. I don't think you could get better service anywhere. I dread to think how much all these machines, all these wonderful stuff, and it all costs. It would be exorbitant if you had to pay for it privately. If I was in America, I never would have been able to afford or get the treatment that I had. So I think, please, Corcanny, before you dismiss the brilliant people and a lot of the setup that we have in our National Health Service.
Thank you. And thank you for being with us tonight. On that point, the language that Wes Streeting's using, that the NHS is a service, not a shrine, that it's broken, how does that go down, do you think, with the staff who are treating people like that man in the audience here?
Well, firstly, I'm really sorry to hear about your diagnosis, and I couldn't agree with you more. Our frontline staff in the NHS are the absolute best of us, and they deserve the best from politics, and they deserve us being honest about what's going on. 1 in 6 Scots are on a waiting list. This was one of the things that was haunting us when we were planning the budget about how are we going to get more investment into Scotland's NHS, and we were able to do that through the budget, which created a record settlement for Scotland. So that's the first thing. Money does help. It's not the be-all and end-all. It does help. Of course, here in Scotland, health is devolved. And for those of you that are languishing on a waiting list, who can't get a GP appointment, who don't have access to dentistry, who have often, in some cases, gone private, having never in a million years thought they'd do that, have dipped into your own savings to do that, the thing I'd say to you is, see in 2026 when you're holding a ballot paper in your hand, and at that point the SNP will have been in administration for nearly 20 years. I just urge you to think, is that NHS that you are receiving, that you're paying for, is it of the standard that you have a right to expect? And I suspect for lots of you, when you look into your heart about that, you'll say no and say it is actually time for a new direction. The First Minister has indeed made an NHS speech. He's said he's taken personal control of the NHS. Actually, all we got was reheated announcements. There is no workforce plan, and there's no plan that I can see that will actually deal with that fundamental problem. 1 in 6 people, on average, in an audience like this, be on a waiting list. It can't be right. Can't be right.
I will come to you in a second. Lady in the front row down here. Yes.
I was just going to say, I work for the NHS, and you said something about politics needs to look after our NHS staff, and I can say that we're not being looked after at all. We're completely burnt out. I'm fed up of hearing that the NHS is on its knees when the NHS staff are working as hard as they can under insane pressures, and ultimately there's staff that are trained and waiting for jobs, and we're not employing them. So I don't understand. There's staff that are ready to go in jobs in mental health and psychology services. You know, children are waiting 3 or 4 years to be seen in CAMS. We've got staff waiting that are ready, that are trained, and there's no jobs for them.
So when you hear people saying the NHS is broken, how does that make you feel?
It's so disheartening, because you're going in every day and you're working as hard as you can. Like, the levels of burnout, staff sickness is at an all-time high. People can't cope. People are so burnt out. I'm seeing like people in my team every day stressed out. From everyone from clinical staff to admin staff, everyone is on their knees, and we're being told that it's broken. Yeah, I think we're all fed up of hearing it.
Man in the front row down here.
I would like to agree with a lot of the points that have already been made. I don't think it's necessarily the NHS that is broken. I work with people who are often in mental health wards, and they've been in there a while. They can't get discharged from the ward because their home is not suitable. They maybe haven't got any heating, they haven't got any money, their benefits aren't working, and then eventually they do get discharged and they go to a home that's cold, and they're just back in with social services, and then lo and behold, they're back in hospital within a few weeks or months. And the system just doesn't seem to be joined up, doesn't seem to work, but it's not necessarily the NHS.
What needs to happen?
It's a difficult question. I think I like the idea of the National Care Service, maybe a National Social Work Service, and provision of benefits and welfare and that sort of stuff, all linked up together.
Thank you. And lady just behind you as well. Yes.
Hi there. I also work in the NHS, and I'm not concerned about the semantics of the situation, whether you call it broken or not, but I do actually appreciate some acknowledgement of the problems, because I think if staff are burnt out and demoralised and politicians act like everything's okay, that's worse. I would say that in answer to the initial question about the NHS's original aims, it strikes me that it's still seeking to be an everyman. And you know, it was originally presumably envisaged to provide care that was free at the point of need. And in many cases now, it's trying to be free at the point of want. And it's not politically expedient for parties to acknowledge that it can't just do everything that everyone wants it to do. So, whilst I would entirely agree, Kirsty, you said that money can do some things, and that's absolutely right. It seems like we're always addressing supply. And supply is probably the bigger issue, but I think we do need to address demand. We need to start having grown-up conversations and not infantilising the public. We can't do everything if we want to do the things that are really important.
Thank you. Thank you. Douglas Lumsden.
Yeah, no, I'd just like to echo what's been said about, you know, the staff of the NHS are brilliant, and it really does sound like we're failing those staff. I think what was key, and we've heard it already, is prevention and early intervention. I think it's by the time people actually get to see a doctor and get then to be referred, things have progressed and a lot worse. So I think if we got that, if it was easier to see a doctor, then that would hopefully lessen the demand on the hospitals. We do need to sort out social care, because as we've seen just now, there's bed blocking, which is reducing the capacity in hospitals. It's not an easy fix, but you know, the SNP have been in charge for a long time. They've been in charge of the NHS in Scotland for a long time, and things aren't getting any better.
Well, the Conservatives ran the NHS in England for 14 years, and you've got the same problems. Exactly the same problems.
Yeah, and you know, there's failures there as well. I'm not trying to you know, get around that at all. It's a difficult thing to sort, but I think it needs all parties to get together and work together, because I think the staff deserve that.
Thank you. Lady in the white here. Yes.
So I've worked for the NHS for the last 40 years. I've seen it under multiple governments. Nothing ever changes. It's just promises and we'll do this and we can do that. It doesn't change.
What do you want to see?
Where do I start? I would like to see some recognition from the government of how bad things are, because I don't think anybody, unless you're on the front line, actually realise what that lady said, what staff are going into every single day, watching patients in corridors, not having a ward to move anybody to. The public are angry with frontline staff. We are on the front line getting it from them as if it's our fault, and nobody seems to care. And you said that about, you know, all your governments. All the governments I've been a nurse under, nothing has changed. It's all promises. It's very frustrating.
Karen Dunbar.
Wow. I feel quite humbled listening to all that. And especially I agree with my friend there about talking about the treatment that he's had for the NHS, and I've had exactly the same. Nothing, it feels like nothing but the best, despite staff being really, really to the wire. There's a concept which is, I don't know, in the last sort of 50 years or so, that you build breakage into products now, and sometimes it's hard not to be suspicious at thinking, well, is that maybe happening with the NHS? Because it wouldn't surprise me if some people would benefit for the NHS not existing and us moving into the American model, the insurance model.
That lady said this has happened under successive governments.
Aye,
this has not been under one.
Like over decades. But do you know, the idea that there are different models, and there are, of course there are, but it really feels like it's the insurance model, the American model, that we'd be moving towards. I mean, it feels like we're I was going to say the 51st state of the USA, but actually we'd be the 52nd after Greenland.
John McLellan.
Yeah, going right back to the original point about the NHS founded in the 1940s, and Angus mentioned very briefly about an ageing population, and that's really what it all comes down to. That the NHS is overstretched because we're not just living a bit longer, we're living, you know, at least a decade longer than we were when the thing was designed. You know, I've had some experience of it myself. When it's great, when it's good, it's great. I had a heart operation not that long ago, and it was brilliant. But just in recent weeks, I've been trying to find a care home for my mother. And I've been touring various care homes and seeing what the facilities were like and seeing what the availability was like. Now, she's been in hospital for 3 months, medically fit to be discharged, nowhere to go.
So she is, I'm sorry to use the phrase, but she's bed blocking. That's effectively.
She is in a ward waiting for transfer to a care home. And in, you know, room after room after room after room of people in their 80s and 90s who all need looking after, who in 1940s would not be here. And I think that the honesty of the conversation is that what are you going to do with a service that was designed when people were not living anything like as long and did not have the availability of treatments which are available now but which must be paid for. Now, I mean, the constant reference back to American systems is really, really unhelpful. The French have an insurance system married up with a free at point of need. The Germans have an insurance system as well. And Wes Streeting was honest enough before the election to be talking about an insurance-based model. And I think that the honesty has to come into that kind of discussion. But that seems to have disappeared. You know, we talk about there not being a plan and the Conservative government being to blame in England and the SNP being to blame in Scotland. The Labour Party's had all those years in opposition to think about it and have come into power, and guess what? They don't have a plan either. They've launched another review. At some point, someone's got to put words into action, and Wes Streeting had all the rhetoric before the election, and now nothing's happening.
OK, watch this space. Your views from home. The hashtag is BBCDN on social media. There's one final question I really wanted to squeeze in tonight, because lots of you wanted to talk about it, and it's from Erin Macaulay. Erin, good evening.
The First Minister of Scotland has said that eradicating child poverty is his key priority. Initiatives like the child payment in Scotland are welcome, but it's still not enough to significantly reduce poverty in Scotland. So what immediate actions would the panellists take to tackle the scale of poverty in Scotland?
Thank you, Erin. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation said just today, in fact, that Scotland is the only part of the UK where child poverty is expected to fall in the next few years, thanks to social security policies. Karen Dunbar.
Again, it's quite heartbreaking just to hear that that's where we're at this stage of evolution. So my thoughts on that would be, it's back to what is the systemic problems, is the pursuit of greed. And until we actually start to look at that and how to look after each other holistically, there's no point in asking and trying to answer just a section of that question. It just feels like it will just go right back into the same cycle until we look at how to scale back on our level of consumerism. I know we're in latter stage capitalism and we're hurtling towards a nice big brick wall somewhere, but that I feel is the real questions that need to be answered.
Angus Robertson, even if we're doing better here in Scotland, but the Joseph Rowntree Foundation say their projections out, 1 in 5 children in Scotland would still be in poverty. That's not eradicating child poverty.
Yep, definitely not there yet, but beginning, I think, to make a difference. And the fact that you shared with us about the Joseph Rowntree Foundation suggesting that the policy intervention that the questioner herself raised is making a difference. So the first thing is we need to keep on with the child payment, which only exists in Scotland. Labour's not doing this down south. This is happening here because it is an intervention that's making a difference to tens of thousands of families around the country.
But how do you reach the rest? If there's still 1 in 5, how do you reach the rest?
Well, firstly, for any families that haven't applied for the child payment who are entitled to it, I would encourage them to do that because, as we have heard, it is making a difference. But we need to do much more than that. We need to make sure that there are opportunities for all kids in all families. So that's intimately tied to education and opportunity. And these things cannot be changed overnight. But what I would say is, firstly, the government needs to make it a priority, and the Scottish Government has. So when we sit and we talk around the Cabinet table about what we are doing, child poverty is absolutely up there as a key priority. So we will try and make the right policy interventions where we can, but we have to understand that there are some things that are easier fixes. So having our own social security system in Scotland where we can make additional payments is a good start. Other things will take longer. And these are big systems. Poverty hasn't just arrived in Scotland, particularly in this part of the country where poverty, frankly, has been endemic for decades. We need to get to grips with it. We are working at it, but it will take more time.
Erin,
people have asked for honesty,
question,
and that is the truth of
what do you think of that answer?
Well, I think that it's clear that it's not really a priority in its actions. You know, like the lack of urgency to tackle child poverty in Scotland is shameful. And, you know, the Scottish Child Payment absolutely is a great initiative. However, there's thousands of families that don't qualify for it. You know, and there's things that the Scottish Government could do tomorrow, like expand universal free school meals, that they're not doing. So I'd be questioning why are they not using all their levers. So it doesn't appear to me that it's that urgent, and I would urge all politicians to go live in poverty for a week and come back and then, you know, see how that feels.
Thank you. Johnson, when he says it is the #1 priority for his government. Kirsty McNeill, the Child Poverty Action Group said the 2-child cap is the biggest driver of child poverty. You voted for that.
Look, the reality is the scale of poverty in Scotland is Scotland's shame. None of us can rest when a single child or person is living in poverty. I spoke to somebody this week that said in their community life expectancy has fallen to 47. That is obscene in one of the richest countries in the world. It's also obscene, I spoke to a Midlothian food bank, half of their users are in work. That is a damning indictment of an economy that is just not working.
Perhaps
for
people with
people.
more than 2 children. So why did you continue to vote for the 2-child cap?
So the reality is welfare is one of the ways that we fix problems once they have arisen. Erin asked the question, what would you do to solve the problem and prevent the problem? And the reality is, if you work with families in poverty, as I did in my previous role, the #1 thing they will tell you is they don't want to rely on welfare or on charity handouts from food banks and organisations like Save the Children. They want decent work that allows them to feed and clothe their children. Everyone in one of the richest countries in the world has a right to expect that. To get that, you need an economy that works for working people, which is why we have focused, in the first instance, not on the welfare reform, which will be one part of what needs to happen to fight child poverty. We focused from minute 1 on decent work and improving pay. Improving parental pay is the single most impactful thing you can do for child poverty. That's why we moved so fast to get that pay rise to 200,000 of the lowest paid Scots. It's why I'm very proud, although it has been criticised on the panel, it's why I'm very proud of our new deal for working people that is supposed to get power and money into the hands of working people so that they are not reliant on welfare. Welfare, if I may say, is a sign of failure, not a sign of success. If you have a successful economy that's working hardest for those with the least, we wouldn't have people having to turn up at food banks or rely on welfare payments, welcome though they may be.
There's a man shaking his head. I'm going to try and get to you at the end. John McLellan.
Yeah, I mean, Kirsty makes some very good points here. I mean, particularly about welfare being a sign of failure rather than a sign of success. When I was an Edinburgh councillor for 5 years, and we commissioned the Joseph Rowntree Foundation to look into poverty in Edinburgh, and the report they produced pinpointed one particular thing. The one thing that if you solved that, you would solve a lot of the problems with poverty. It was housing. And until you crack housing and the shortage of supply and the rising prices, then poverty will be very, very difficult to tackle, and it will end up with papering over the cracks with welfare and things like that. Okay. Housing is the priority, and that comes back to growth. How do you cut through the planning system, and how do you deliver more houses in a difficult situation?
Things that Rachel Reeves is talking about. Douglas Lumsden.
Yeah, I agree with what a lot that Kirsty just said. I think, you know, like the last question, it's all about early intervention and prevention. You know, it's back about education, giving kids a proper education, having proper, good, well-paid jobs, giving them sort of hope and aspiration.
Is welfare the answer?
I agree with Kirsty. That's a sign that we've actually failed. We need to get there earlier. Make sure that people don't go into welfare. Give them that proper, well-paid jobs so they don't have to go into welfare.
Okay, man with the glasses in the middle here. Yes.
I feel that we're not helping this because the fact is the Labour government have gone into power, they have not got rid of the two-child cap, the bedroom tax, and then I've obviously heard rumours they're going to crack down on disability benefits. That's going to put a lot more people into poverty. And I'll put something back to what Kirsty said. When it comes to next year, when you see two ballot papers in theory, one peach and one purple, you'll look at it and say, which government's going to hopefully look after the people? And at least the Scottish government are trying. But I feel like UK government are just going to say, well, growth this, growth that. But in theory, we don't need to have an economy that works for the people, not works for the 1%.
OK, and one last voice, the lady with the red hair at the back. Yes, on you go.
I think it's an absolute disgrace to say that welfare is a sign of failure. It's a sign of a civilised society. The people who are unable to work for whatever reason are taken good care of and have the ability to lead kind of decent lives and are treated with respect. Okay. And just one more point. £11.44 is the national minimum wage. It's not about living on that for a week. Okay. It's about living on that for month after month after month. Okay. And what a struggle and how difficult that is. And that's what some of these politicians need to do.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. That's it for tonight. We're out of time. We're back with you next week in Stirling, though. Have a look at our website if you want to come along and join us there. Details on your screen. You can use the QR code if you want. If you missed any of tonight's show, we're repeated on BBC One Scotland a little bit later, or watch any time that suits you on the BBC iPlayer. Thank you very much indeed to my panel here tonight and to our brilliant audience here in Govan on the banks of the Clyde in Glasgow, and to you at home for watching. We'll see you next week in Stirling. In the meantime, from all of us here, stay safe, stay well. From all of us in Debate Night, good night.